everyone. Welcome to another episode on the Shortcast. I'm here with me today, Munerazi from Zimbabwe. We're fortunate to have Munerazi with us today to talk about everything about Zimbabwe athletics. And welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. It's great to be here, and I really appreciate the work you've been doing, especially covering African athletes whose stories have for a long time been in the background, but now with the Shortcast, we're really seeing a lot of those stories coming up to the limelight, and we really appreciate.
I appreciate the support and the vote of confidence you give in the platform. To not waste my time, let's jump right into our discussion today. First of all, can you give us a little brief and introduction about Zimbabwe athletics, a little bit history about Zimbabwe athletics and what has contributed to the success of Zimbabwe athletics so far?
Okay, so Zimbabwean athletics has started long back in the 1960s, thereabouts. You know, it's been a long history, but in the most recent times, we've seen that there's been a great development, especially with athletes then going abroad. So I can talk about a key figure who is spoken about often when we talk about Zim athletics, at least in the most recent times, is Ngonizashi Makusha, who got a bronze medal in the long jump in Daegu, you know. So over time, he was also a Bowerman winner in the States, and, you know, he has the national record of 984 in the 100 meters. So you'd realize that over time, in the most recent times, with the movement of Zimbabwean athletes to the States, we've then seen a lot of, appearances on the global competitions. So even before the group of Ngoni Makusha and them, there's also a group of, a coach at Auburn. His name is Ken Arden. He's based in the States. Tawanda Chiwira. There's also Louis Banda. He's a national record holder in the 400 meters with a 44. He's based at TCU now. So these are people who sort of moved to the United States, and then they managed to develop their careers there. And then locally also, we've also seen a lot of success, particularly in the long distance arena. So you realize that our national record holders, the previous one in the marathon, Cuthbert Nyasambwe, was also an Olympian, as well as the current national recorder in the men's marathon, that's Isaac Mpofu. These are local projects. These are people who were purely based in Zimbabwe, who train here, and then they've had that sort of support. So generally, in Zimbabwe particularly, athletics is one of the main sports, especially where it comes to participating in global competitions. I mean, in the past decade, there has not been a global competition or a year where Zimbabwe does not feature in a global competition. So that's basically the background of Zim athletics in as far as my time in is concerned, and my age also.
That is awesome. That is a great background for anyone who don't know about Zimbabwe athletics. Let's dive right a little bit into that period. I know you were giving us a period between Makusha and all the other guys. During that period, after Makusha and other guys left, there was a little bit of a gap until recently, where we had the Charlies, the Charambas and stuff. What contributed to that period, like those period where there was like a little bit of a, not like a bigger star during that period? What contributed to it?
Okay, so I'm sure the period you're talking about, because 2008, Brian Zingai, a 200 meter runner, he was in the Olympic final against Usain Bolt. He was literally next to Usain Bolt in the 200 meter final. And then I'm sure you're talking about that period beginning 2008. And, you know, there were several issues in the country, you know, economically and everything. And I'm sure that then affected, you know, the prevalence of sport. But also, you'd realize that, you know, we've also still had athletes moving to the States and, you know, participating in several competitions. I'm not as well versed in terms of the system in the United States, how it works, but by observation, you know, looking at websites and everything, I've then noticed that, you know, there's the NCAA, the NJCAA, those are very busy leagues, as it were, where athletes are racing week in and week out. So you'd realize that to get an athlete to qualify, it takes a lot, even while they are based in the States. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of systems of support and everything, especially that period when the collegiate system ends in June and August, where just before the closure of the qualifying period. That is a very critical point in the season. But also I've then noticed, even in recent times, that it's better for an athlete to qualify for global championships and even be successful there if they qualify during the NCAA
Yeah.
season or the NJCAA season. For example, Vimbai Maisorewa, she was at Cloud County, now
Mhm.
she's at Auburn, and this season alone, she has already qualified for the World Championships,
400, yeah.
right? And that is a great thing. But also another key thing that has happened, especially in the recent times, like you're mentioning the times of Charamba and Kali, you'd realize that there's then been a deliberate effort to give athletes support while at the global championships. So yes, Zimbabwean athletes in that period where you mentioned that there's a gap, they would go, but the performances were not really as noticeable. Now you'd realize that, particularly if we look at Kali, for example, when he went to Budapest for the World Champs, he
Yeah.
went with a coach from Zimbabwe,
Yeah.
right? And then they met there. And he was in the heats, to the 200-meter heats, and he went out of the heats. Fast forward a year later in Paris, his coach Henry Tabari was there as
Yeah.
part of the Zinc delegation. If you look at Charamba, Ken Anden was also there. So
Yeah.
for me as a coach now, looking at the factors that influence performance, especially at a global stage, you realize that that decision of having someone's personal coach at a global championships, it is very critical towards their success. And so with that little adjustment also, that's when we've then seen those two boys getting into the final. And I'm sure, something bigger is promising as we go forward.
That is very refreshing to hear, and I hope any other federation that is listening to this will be able to identify some of the strategies that your government is doing or your federation is doing to help improve the performance of athletes at a global level, which is very awesome because just changing a little tweak to where they have to compete with, they have to train or they have to be at a camp with a coach who they've not worked with the whole year, to changing it to their personal coach, making a big difference, making from not qualifying to the finals at Budapest to making the finals at Olympic. That is a very big, that's a big achievement. Moving on.
It is because, look, to perform, there's not only the physical that comes into play. So like myself, I'm a World Athletics Level 2 coach. I can write a training program. I'm trained to do that. But there's a whole psychological bit. We need at a global championships a person who understands the athlete as an individual before they're an athlete.
Yeah.
So that means they can prepare the athlete psychologically, which is a very critical factor, especially like, you're getting into a heat with Noah Lyles, for example. How do you manage that? And then there's also the nutrition, the routines and everything. So all these things, they then come into play for that performance to happen. And unfortunately, athletics is just it's just a few, it's just a few seconds and the race is done,
Yeah.
But the work that comes into play is a lot. So
A lot of
indeed,
work.
it's a very critical decision that has been made, and it's revolutionary, if you ask me.
That is very awesome, and I really applaud the federation or whoever took that decision to include their coaches or their personal coaches at the Olympics, or to for them to be able to perform really high. I applaud them. Fred, let's dive right into talent identification development in Zimbabwe. How is that done? How are talent identified and developed in Zimbabwe?
Okay, so in Zimbabwe, we have a school athletic system. It runs mainly from February up to April, right? So the country has 10 provinces, and in those provinces, there's a district, and in a district, there's a zone. So and athletes, okay, schools rather, they belong to their zone. The school belongs to the zone, and then a group of a few schools then combine to form a zone, and then they compete against other zones in the district, and then they combine to form a district team, which competes against other districts in the province, and then the provinces, the 10 provinces, then meet at the national championships. So it is at these national championships that talent is identified now. Because if an athlete can progress from their school to their zone to their district to the province and ultimately to the national championships and they win, that right there is a clear indicator that they have the potential. The main age groups that are there in Zimbabwe is the under 16. So it would be the athletes that are turning 16 in the following year. The under 18, it's just the regular World Athletics for age groups. The under 18, which is the youth, according to World Athletics, and then the under 20, which is the juniors, according to World Athletics. So our school system sort of follows those age groups, including then the under 16. So with the progression of an athlete from under 16, this is in the high school bit, we can already see a trend of events and talent. There's also the primary schools, the younger schools, model, where they also progress up to national level. But you would realize that in that stage, it's a bit early, too early to identify because, at that age, kids are doing multiple events and everything. So it's a bit too early. But as they progress to the under 16 and nationals, you can then identify to say this is a sprinter and everything. So like myself, within my club, I already know athletes that I'm earmarking for the Youth Olympics in Dakar. Because I've journeyed with these from when they were in under 15 and now under 16. So with their progression and now under 18, with their progression, I can tell that there's potential in them. So now let's come to the development side. So as a country, we participate in regional competitions, the COSASA, as well as OSIC Region 5. So we have the OSIC Region 5 in July this year.
Okay.
But you'd realize that from a developmental perspective, there's a huge reliance on clubs, particularly.
Oh, okay. So
Right.
Zimbabwe also rely on clubs for talent development.
Yes, definitely. It's actually the main thing. So like even with our, I'm sure you're aware that we had a 4x400 meter team at the World Relays.
Yeah.
So those guys, they trained in their clubs up to the very end.
Oh, okay.
Until they actually win. So it's actually quite impressive, the club system. But
that have been there for a long time, or is this a new strategy that have been developed to improve athletics and identify and develop talent in the country?
Well, the schooling system has always been there for a long time. But on the extra work, because when we're talking about a child in a school, they don't really then train as much as they would if they were belonging to a club. So the club system has always been there, right? The minor gap that is there that I've been trying to advocate for is national programs where athletes with a certain level of potential are then put into camps at different periods of the season, so that if we know that these 10 are our best sprinters, these 10 are our best long distance runners, these 4 are our best jumpers, before the beginning of a 6-week cycle, we can then put them in some sort of camp for 2 weeks under supervision by a national coach. And what this does is that there's then consistency as well in terms of performance. Yeah. Because what you realize is I may be a club coach and I can develop 2 or so athletes, but I then don't get to go with them to a competition where it matters the most. Because another coach will then take the whole group and go with them, right? So my thinking is, if this other coach who is, earmarked to travel for a competition, if they then get the kids at a certain stage in the preparation, and then we collaborate so that by the time they go to the competition with my athletes, for example, there's also some sort of relationship going on there between myself and the coach and myself and the athletes and that other coach. And so, these are also the things that affect performance, as we were mentioning earlier.
Oh, okay. That is awesome. Moving on to my next topic. How are the South African nations, like you are surrounded by Botswana, South Africa, and other South African nation? You guys have seen their performance over the years, how they are performing globally, winning titles, having world record holders like South Africa,
Well,
where we Manika and all that. They've been performing really, really well. Is that influencing athletics in Zimbabwe? What impact is it having on athletics in Zimbabwe?
so it's more of an inspirational point of view, especially at individual club level to say, like, for example, Letsile, to be honest, he's based in Botswana.
Yeah.
Bayapondori is based in Botswana. Scotch is based in Botswana. Colin Kebinachipi is based in Botswana, right? And then if we, giving the example that you looked at of weight, when he broke the world record, he was literally based in South Africa. Yes, he did go to Jamaica for a camp, but he was based in South Africa. And then all these other athletes like Akani and everyone.
Yeah, even with the Jamaicans, the Jamaican camp, I think he went with his coach by then.
He went with his coach, yes. The coach was there.
Yeah.
So you'd realize that it's more of inspirational at individual club level to say, if another country can do it, we can also do it. Like with the example I was sharing about the team that qualified for the world relays, they were training in their individual clubs and then they combined and then they went to qualify. So now what is needed now is, better support systems to these individual clubs, because now Botswana and South Africa, they have better support systems within their countries. Like before the World Relay, South Africa were in a relay camp. They were in a relay camp, which our country didn't get into. They were in a relay camp, and you would realize that they had a pool of athletes to participate in several events.
Yeah.
We had 4 guys who qualified in an additional sub.
Yeah.
You see, so other countries where they were fielding 8 athletes per event, we were fielding 4. So there's a bit of a resource gap in our country, not necessarily an expertise gap, because just out of interest, I can tell you that Coach Dosi Mosimanyana, Letsile's coach, he did his coaching courses in Zimbabwe.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, he did. He did his coaching courses in Zimbabwe. You understand? So it then shows that the expertise is there, but there's a bit of a resource gap. And with that resource gap, it creates problems, because an athlete in Botswana can fully rely on athletics. But an athlete in Zimbabwe now, because the sport doesn't pay, they would then have to do other jobs and other things to get an income. But if only there was enough support such that an athlete, all they do is wake up and train and focus on athletics only, we would also see different results, and then also access to physiotherapy, access to better nutrition and everything, we would also see different results. So I'm quite impressed, by the performances of Zimbabwean athletes with the current resources and support systems that they have. So it's actually inspirational what our neighboring countries are doing, and it is my hope that we will also get there somehow.
That is very awesome. That is very awesome. I'm glad you mentioned about the relays, and one of our discussion with my co-hosts a few days ago, we're talking about the potential of Zimbabwe 4x1 team. Is there a preparation? Is this a strategy in place to like get a 4x1? Because you guys have a really good team. If a squad actually, that if you guys are able to assemble this guy, you'll be able to get a good relay. Is there a thought in the country, or is it something that is being discussed in the media space in Zimbabwe about a potential 4x1 team?
Okay, so yeah, I like how you say that, because like the moment you say potential, I'm thinking about the myriad of athletes that could participate in that. Kali, Charamba, Denzel from South Plains is going to UK. There's also David, who's at New Mexico. He's also going. We're not sure where he's going yet at this present moment in time. And there's also Clinton, and then the guys that are here locally. So the major challenge now, is during the collegiate period, these guys can't come together to go and represent the country at like pen relays or something like that. And then when the season is over, during that time, normally there are no races. They would have to go to Europe to find a race where there are 2 or more countries so that they can qualify. Because like right now, there's an opportunity to qualify via the top list for the World Championships, right? Yeah. But it takes a lot of resources and planning and everything. And it's a conversation that is happening in the background. There are other guys like the Brian guy that I was mentioning earlier.
Mhm.
These are people who could assist in facilitating some sort of teamwork in from the state side.
Yeah.
One guy, when our discussions, one guy actually hinted that it would be in the best interest of the Zimbabwean Federation to sort of establish an office in the states,
Oh yeah.
right? That runs sort of the national team there, brings together athletes, sends them to qualify and whatever, and then we combine with the local efforts, and then there's something special. But this is a sort of long term plan.
Yeah.
But the sad thing about athletics now is that the lifespan of an athlete is very short.
Yeah.
Like the time where Gabriel Mvumvure, Brian Zingai, Ngoni Makusha, the time that they ran, it was there, it was big, and they did these big things, but now it's gone and it's not
Yeah.
coming back.
Exactly.
So that's also my fear to say, and as much as plans are being made, discussions are being held, when is the action step? Because we only have Charamba for some years and then Kali and this whole stream of athletes. And then at some point, it'll be gone. It will just be a legacy. So yeah, I know. It's something that we would hope for to come up very soon.
That is great to hear because the lifespan of athletes is very short. It depends on how long they are gonna compete by. It's fast, like you said. And I know with a country like Ghana, they have the foreign athletics rep who is in charge of like foreign based athletes who coordinates and reports about those athletes to the local authorities, that performance and stuff like that. So I think that'll be something great for. And I know Zimbabwe, you guys already have the coaches here. You have Coach Ken Hendricks and some of the other coaches at TCU and stuff. So I think that'll be very easy to assemble a team and those coaches be able to coordinate the activities of the athletes. So I think that would be something really great to have to incorporate into that as well. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about the coaches in Zimbabwe, coaches here in America, Coach Ken Hendrick, and the other coaches around. Are they what impacts are they having on the coaches in Zimbabwe and the athletics in Zimbabwe in general?
Okay, so for me, once in a while I speak to Coach Ken, and he's got a channel called Outperform.
Yeah,
Where they post videos, educational videos, and everything. So it is those gestures that they do that sort of help to educate some of us young and upcoming coaches, and you'd realize that like we were talking about at the very beginning,
yeah,
the biggest contribution he has made for me, as a coach, is that of, Makachanamba. He used to run when he was still here. He was running 21-1, 21-10. And then he went to the States and he progressed. And now he's a sub 20 guy, on any day, which is quite impressive. So that's a big contribution to me,
yeah.
by that coach. And for him to also be with Macharamba in the
Olympic.
at the Olympic Games and doing that, because to be honest with you, with athletics, with our sport, one athlete can make a significant impact to a whole country. Look at Julian Alfred,
Yeah.
from St. Lucia. Look, it's literally one athlete, but with her individuality, she's made such a huge impact. So it is also a support system that needs to be truly appreciated. And so with coaches like Coach Ken, it's that support that they give to the country that we appreciate, because we know that beyond his work and commitment at Auburn, there's something also extra that he's surely putting in so that the athletes can perform. And so we really appreciate that. But for me, I would also hope for a situation, resources permitting, that is where such coaches that can also, be called in to come locally. Remember, I was talking to you about how we can have a long list of top performing athletes in the country who just need something extra outside of their club and whatever. So it is coaches like Coach Ken who can come through, observe, and do something like that, and then that could make an impact. So it's also a matter of, officializing things, I guess, from my perspective. I mean, we know that Coach Ken is a great coach, but what official role have we given him at
Exactly.
federation level to serve the country? Because
Exactly.
those things are also critical. Someone cannot just wake up and say, I'm going to do this and that because I'm also a Zimbabwean. That comes with a lot of politics and everything. So we also then need to move administratively towards a point in time where we acknowledge that, okay, we have this person, and then we give them, designate them a role, like what you're talking about, the Nigerian Federation that has an officer. We can also have a technical development officer
Mhm.
who is based in the States, who interacts with athletes, and then we
Yeah.
fund him to come through, run a camp or so, and then go back, things like that.
Because that's a huge national asset. Coach Ken is one of the best coaches in the nation, the United States here, and the number of athletes he had produced over the years. So you guys are having a huge resource that I think you're not utilizing enough. So it would be
I
great
agree.
to have all
I
these
agree.
coaches that are like top coaches in the United States here to be able to contribute to the federation as well, because the federation is doing well, but when you have more expertise on board, it's gonna really help. Moving on, few months ago, Zimbabwe Olympic Committee president was elected the IOC president. How is that gonna? What do you think? How do you think it's gonna help impact athletics in Zimbabwe in the long run?
Okay. So, Kirsty Coventry was an athlete, and that's a very key thing in terms of perspective of sport in general. She was an athlete who succeeded. She was an athlete who went through challenges. I remember when there was Zimbabwe Olympic Committee elections, she came through and she delivered a speech. And in a speech, she mentioned something about how when she won her first medal,
Yeah.
it was so easy to get sponsorship, but the journey towards that, it was hard.
Mhm.
you know. So she understands that the journey of an athlete to succeed
Yeah.
is very difficult, especially when they haven't won a global anything,
Yeah.
right? So what she is, kind of wanting to achieve, not only for Zimbabwe but for the world at large, is that there's greater athlete support systems the world over. The International Olympic Committee has this fund called the Olympic Solidarity,
Yeah.
funding for athletes. So with that, there's sort of a goal to ensure that with that resource over there, there's a significant impact in terms of the support that athletes are given in their journey towards their first medal.
Yeah.
Because the corporate world now, it cares about athletes who
But don't
win.
fall. Yeah.
Yes. So it's either you win or nothing. Or athletes who maybe they don't necessarily win, but they have a huge following.
Yeah.
They have a huge story. To develop that story, it requires a lot of resources. And I'm sure, at a global level, as an athlete, she's going to make that impact. And we really hope for the best.